You are the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and you've said his call for a temporary ban on Muslim immigration is not a serious proposal. The former head of the CIA, Michael Hayden, just said this morning it's a recruiting tool for ISIS. If Donald Trump, as president, moved to impose that ban, would you support it or try to stop it?
No, I would not support it, and I've already issued statements to that effect. And what I understand is he has stepped away from those statements.
Well, he has said he still supports those statements. He's also said in every speech that he talks about building a wall on our border and getting Mexico to pay for it. Is that realistic, and what would it do to our relations with Mexico?
You know, obviously, we do need to have good relations with Mexico and Canada. We do. That's one of the things that makes our country in such a stable environment, having two friends on our borders, unlike many countries around the world. There is a security issue. I authored an amendment during the immigration debate that actually makes building a wall look like Ned in the first reader, meaning it was even more difficult. And by the way, I mean a tougher border security measure. By the way, every Democrat in the Senate voted for that measure. So there's no question that we have agreement in our country that we need greater security. It's strongly bipartisan, and I hope that we will implement that because it is a security threat.
But is it realistic to expect Mexico to pay for the wall?
I think people agree with that.
But is it realistic to expect Mexico to pay for that wall?
Well, again, I don't want to get to a debate about the nuances of that. I mean, it's a statement that he has made. I thought this interview was going to be more about the foreign policy arena. I think he has a tremendous opportunity there.
Well, our relations with Mexico is foreign policy.
Okay. Well, look, as to how the wall is paid for, that's something that Congress certainly will debate. My guess is there'll be additional debates regarding how the actual security measures will be put in place. But securing our border has been something that people on both sides of the aisle have supported for years, and we need to do that. And it's understandable that it's become an issue because it's lingered for so long. We had an opportunity to deal with this years ago. It wasn't dealt with. It needs to be dealt with now. And hopefully we'll move beyond that very quickly.
Well, you're also on foreign policy. You're a strong supporter of trade deals, including the new Trans-Pacific Partnership. Donald Trump is opposed to those. He's saying also that he's prepared to impose 45% tariffs on imports from China if they don't change the way they do business. You'd have to vote on that in the Senate. Is that something you could support?
The fact is that look, we are involved in globalization. Every person who picks up their iPhone in the morning deals in globalization. The fact is that trade agreements set the rules of the road. And sometimes we negotiate trade agreements that are good. Some of them are not as good as they should be. The TPP agreement is something that strategically for our nation is important to get right. There are flaws in it that need to be stiffened, and so I hope that we'll move through that. I do believe that having a trade agreement that works for our country is important as we have countries that want to move our way. China is pushing them our way. It's my hope that we'll be able to negotiate something that works. The flaws in this agreement have been pointed out. There are things that need to be resolved, but obviously having an agreement with countries in the China area and the Southeast Asia area is important for our nation, and I hope that we'll get to a place where we have an agreement that Americans can support.
So which specific ideas of Donald Trump on foreign policy are you enthusiastic about? Are you ready to fight for?
So I think here's what I have seen in many of the statements that he's made. It's something that Secretary Baker it's a degree of realism coming back into our foreign policy. For years, we've had neocons on the Republican side. We've had liberal internationalists on the Democratic side. And I think bringing that maturity back into our foreign policy is something that's important. That doesn't mean us being isolationists, but it does mean selective engagement. And we've had some great hearings on this topic. It's bringing a maturity, looking at our U.S. national interest, realizing who our friends are, relationships, things like throwing aside Mubarak so quickly after decades of relationship and not figuring out a better way for him to be eased out. The thing we did in Libya, I mean, again, that was one of the most immature excursions, that will be used, George, again, as an exhibit in international policy schools as to what not to do here in America. So I see a degree of maturity stepping in. I've obviously encouraged that. I want to see good things for our nation. George, I think the thing that has caused people to be tantalized, if you will, to a degree, by the Trump candidacy is they realize that the two parties, acting as they are today, will continue to enable each other to go down a path that is really degrading the nation's greatness. It is. And what they see in Donald Trump is a disruptor, someone who can change that trajectory. Okay. It is up to him now. It is up to his campaign now to take advantage of that, to pivot and move in a direction that shows that they have the ability to do that. I am hopeful that that is going to occur, but they're at that point right now as they move beyond the primary process this week to the World Series of the election, and I'm hopeful that that is what is going to happen.
And that's what we will be watching for.